Robots and Empire by Asimov. Narrated by Pam Ward.
Chapter 7. The Overseer. 23. It was morning on Solaria, morning on the estate, her estate. Off in the distance was the establishment that might have been her establishment. Somehow 20 decades dropped away, and Aurora seemed to her to be a far-off dream that had never happened. She turned to D.G., who was tightening the belt about his thin outer garment, a belt from which 2 sidearms hung. On his left hip was the neuronic whip, on his right something shorter and bulkier that she guessed was a blaster. "Are we going to the house?" she asked. "Eventually," said D.G. with a certain absence of mind. He was inspecting each sidearm in turn, holding one of them to his ear as though he were listening for a faint buzz that would tell him it was alive. "Just the 4 of us?" She automatically turned her eyes to each of the others. D.G., Daniil. She said to Daniil, "Where is Giscard, Daniil?" Daniil said, "It seemed to him, Madame Gladia, that it would be wise to act as an advance guard. As a robot, he might not be noticeable among other robots, and if there should be anything wrong, he could warn us. In any case, he is more expendable than either yourself or the captain." "Good robotic thinking," said D.G. grimly. "It's just as well. Come, we're moving forward now." "Just the 3 of us?" said Gladia, a touch plaintively. "To be honest, I lack Giscard's robotic ability to accept expendability." D.G. said, "We're all expendable, Lady Gladia. 2 ships have been destroyed, every member of each crew indiscriminately brought to an end. There's no safety in numbers here." "You're not making me feel any better, D.G." "Then I'll try. The earlier ships were not prepared. Our ship is, and I'm prepared too." He slapped his 2 hands to his hips. "And you've got a robot with you who has showed himself to be an efficient protector. What's more, you yourself are our best weapon. You know how to order robots to do what you want them to do, and that may well be crucial. You are the only one with us who can do that, and the earlier ships had no one at all of your caliber. Come, then." They moved forward. Gladia said after a while, "We're not walking toward the house." "No, not yet. First, we're walking toward a group of robots. You see them, I hope." "Yes, I do, but they're not doing anything." "No, they're not. There were many more robots present when we first landed. Most of them have gone, but these remain. Why?" "If we ask them, they'll tell us." "You will ask them, Lady Gladia." "They'll answer you, D.G., as readily as they'll answer me. We're equally human." D.G. stopped short, and the other 2 stopped with him. He turned to Gladia and said, smiling, "My dear Lady Gladia, equally human, a spacer and a settler. Whatever has come over you?" "We are equally human to a robot," she said waspishly, "and please don't play games. I did not play the game of spacer and earthman with your ancestor." D.G.'s smile vanished. "That's true. My apologies, my lady. I shall try to control my sense of the sardonic, for, after all, on this world we are allies." He said a moment later, "Now, madam, what I want you to do is to find out what orders the robots have been given, if any. If there are any robots that might, by some chance, know you, if there are any human beings on the estate or on the world, or anything else it occurs to you to ask. They shouldn't be dangerous. They're robots, and you're human. They can't hurt you. To be sure," he added, remembering, "your Daniil rather manhandled Nis, but that was under conditions that don't apply here, and Daniil may go with you." Respectfully, Daniil said, "I would in any case accompany Lady Gladia, Captain. That is my function." "Giscard's function, too, I imagine," said D.G., "and yet he's wandered off." "For a purpose, Captain, that he discussed with me, and that we agreed was an essential way of protecting Lady Gladia." "Very well. You 2 move forward. I'll cover you both." He drew the weapon on his right hip. "If I call out, 'Drop,' the 2 of you fall down instantly. This thing doesn't play favorites." "Please don't use it as anything but a last resort, D.G.," said Gladia. There would scarcely be an occasion, too, against robots. Come, Daniil. Off she went, stepping forward rapidly and firmly toward the group of about a dozen robots that were standing just in front of a line of low bushes, with the morning sun reflecting in glints here and there from their burnished exteriors. 24. The robots did not retreat, nor did they advance. They remained calmly in place. Gladia counted them, 11 in plain sight. There might be others, possibly, that were unseen. They were designed Solaria fashion, very polished, very smooth, no illusion of clothing, and not much realism. They were almost like mathematical abstractions of the human body, with no two of them quite alike. She had the feeling that they were by no means as flexible or complex as Auroran robots, but were more single-mindedly adapted to specific tasks. She stopped at least 4 meters from the line of robots, and Daniil, she sensed, stopped as soon as she did and remained less than a meter behind. He was close enough to interfere at once in case of need, but was far enough back to make it clear that she was the dominant spokesperson of the pair. The robots before her, she was certain, viewed Daniil as a human being, but she also knew that Daniil was too conscious of himself as a robot to presume upon the misconception of other robots. Gladia said, "Which one of you will speak with me?" There was a brief period of silence, as though an unspoken conference were taking place. Then one robot took a step forward. "Madam, I will speak." "Do you have a name?" "No, madam. I have only a serial number." "How long have you been operational?" "I have been operational 29 years, madam." "Has anyone else in this group been operational for longer?" "No, madam. It is why I, rather than another, am speaking." "How many robots are employed on this estate?" "I do not have that figure, madam." "Roughly?" "Perhaps 10,000, madam." "Have any been operational for longer than 20 decades?" "The agricultural robots include some who may, madam." "And the household robots?" "They have not been operational long, madam. The masters prefer new model robots." Gladia nodded, turned to Daniil, and said, "That makes sense. It was so in my day, too." She turned back to the robot. "To whom does this estate belong?" "It is the Zoberlon estate, madam." "How long has it belonged to the Zoberlon family?" "Longer, madam, than I have been operational. I do not know how much longer, but the information can be obtained." "To whom did it belong before the Zoberlons took possession?" "I do not know, madam, but the information can be obtained." "Have you ever heard of the Delmar family?" "No, madam." Gladia turned to Daniil and said rather ruefully, "I'm trying to lead the robot, little by little, as Elijah might once have done, but I don't think I know how to do it properly." "On the contrary, Lady Gladia," said Daniil gravely, "it seems to me you have established much. It is not likely that any robot on this estate, except perhaps for a few of the agriculturals, would have any memory of you. Would you have encountered any of the agriculturals in your time?" Gladia shook her head. "Never. I don't recall seeing any of them even in the distance." "It is clear, then, that you are not known on this estate." "Exactly. And poor D.G. has brought us along for nothing. If he expected any good of me, he has failed." "To know the truth is always useful, madam. Not to be known is, in this case, less useful than to be known. But not to know whether one is known or not would be less useful still. Are there not perhaps other points on which you might elicit information?" "Yes. Let's see." For a few seconds she was lost in thought. Then she said softly, "It's odd. When I speak to these robots, I speak with a pronounced Solarian accent. Yet I do not speak so to you." Daniil said, "It is not surprising, Lady Gladia. The robots speak with such an accent, for they are Solarian. That brings back the days of your youth, and you speak automatically as you spoke then. You are at once yourself, however, when you turn to me, because I am a part of your present world." A slow smile appeared on Gladia's face, and she said, "You reason more and more like a human being, Daniil." She turned back to the robots and was keenly aware of the peacefulness of the surroundings. The sky was an almost unmarked blue, except for a thin line of clouds on the western horizon, indicating that it might turn cloudy in the afternoon. There was the sound of rustling leaves in a light wind, the whirring of insects, a lonely bird call. No sound of human beings. There might be many robots about, but they worked silently. There weren't the exuberant sounds of human beings that she had grown accustomed to, painfully, at first, on Aurora. But now, back on Solaria, she found the peace wonderful. It had not been all bad on Solaria. She had to admit it. She said to the robot quickly, with a note of compulsion edging her voice, "Where are your masters?" It was useless, however, to try to hurry or alarm a robot, or to catch it off guard. It said, without any sign of perturbation, "They are gone, madam." "Where have they gone?" "I do not know, madam. I was not told." "Which of you knows?" There was a complete silence. Gladia said, "Is there any robot on the estate who would know?" The robot said, "I do not know of any, madam." "Did the masters take robots with them?" "Yes, madam." "Yet they didn't take you. Why do you remain behind?" "To do our work, madam." "Yet you stand here and do nothing. Is that work?" "We guard the estate from those from outside, madam." "Such as we?" "Yes, madam." "But here we are, and yet you still do nothing. Why is that?" "We observe, madam. We have no further orders." "Have you reported your observations?" "Yes, madam." "To whom?" "To the overseer, madam." "Where is the overseer?" "In the mansion, madam." "Ah." Gladia turned and walked briskly back to D.G. Daniil followed. "Well?" said D.G. He was holding both weapons at the ready, but put them back in their holsters as they returned. Gladia shook her head. "Nothing. No robot knows me. No robot, I'm sure, knows where the Solarians have gone, but they report to an overseer." "An overseer?" "On Aurora and the other spacer worlds, the overseer on large estates with numerous robots is some human whose profession it is to organize and direct groups of working robots in the fields, mines, and industrial establishments." "Then there are Solarians left behind." Gladia shook her head. "Solaria is an exception. The ratio of robots to human beings has always been so high that it has not been the custom to assign a man or woman to oversee the robots. That job has been done by another robot, one that is specially programmed." "Then there is a robot in that mansion." D.G. nodded with his head. "Who is more advanced than these, and who might profitably be questioned." "Perhaps, but I am not certain it is safe to attempt to go into the mansion." D.G. said sardonically, "It is only another robot." "The mansion may be booby-trapped." "This field may be booby-trapped." Gladia said, "It would be better to send one of the robots to the mansion, to tell the overseer that human beings wish to speak to him." D.G. said, "That will not be necessary. That job has apparently been done already. The overseer is emerging, and is neither a robot nor a him. What I see is a human female." Gladia looked up in astonishment. Advancing rapidly toward them was a tall, well-formed, and exceedingly attractive woman. Even at a distance there was no doubt whatever as to her sex. 25. D.G. smiled broadly. He seemed to be straightening himself a bit, squaring his shoulders, throwing them back. One hand went lightly to his beard, as though to make sure it was sleek and smooth. Gladia looked at him with disfavor. She said, "That is not a Solarian woman." "How can you tell?" said D.G. "No Solarian woman would allow herself to be seen so freely by other human beings. Seen, not viewed." "I know the distinction, my lady. Yet you allow me to see you." "I have lived over 20 decades on Aurora. Even so, I have enough Solarian left in me still not to appear to others like that." "She has a great deal to display, madam. I would say she is taller than I am, and as beautiful as a sunset." The overseer had stopped 20 meters short of their position, and the robots had moved aside so that none of them remained between the woman on one side and the three from the ship on the other. DG said, "Customs can change in 20 decades. "Not something as basic as the Solarian dislike of human contact," said Gladia sharply. "Not in 200 decades. She had slipped into her Solarian twang again. "I think you underestimate social plasticity. Still, Solarian or not, I presume she's a spacer. And if there are other spacers like that, I'm all for peaceful coexistence." Gladia's look of disapproval deepened. "Well, do you intend to stand and gaze in that fashion for the next hour or two? Don't you want me to question the woman?" DG started and turned to look at Gladia with distinct annoyance. "You question the robots as you've done. I question the human beings." "Especially the females, I suppose." "I wouldn't like to boast, but it is a subject on which I have never known a man who didn't." Daniil interposed. "I do not think the woman will wait longer. If you wish to retain the initiative, Captain, approach her now. I will follow, as I did with Madame Gladia." "I scarcely need the protection," said DG brusquely. "You are a human being, and I must not, through inaction, allow harm to come to you." DG walked forward briskly, Daniil following. Gladia, reluctant to remain behind alone, advanced a bit tentatively. The overseer watched quietly. She wore a smooth white robe that reached down to mid-thigh and was belted at the waist. It showed a deep and inviting cleavage, and her nipples were clearly visible against the thin material of the robe. There was no indication that she was wearing anything else but a pair of shoes. When DG stopped, a meter of space separated them. Her skin, he could see, was flawless. Her cheekbones were high, her eyes wide-set and somewhat slanted, her expression serene. "Madam," said DG, speaking as close an approximation to Auroran patrician as he could manage, "have I the pleasure of speaking to the overseer of this estate?" The woman listened for a moment, and then said, in an accent so thickly Solarian as to seem almost comic when coming from her perfectly shaped mouth, "You are not a human being." She then flashed into action so quickly that Gladia, still some 10 meters off, could not see in detail what had happened. She saw only a blur of motion, and then DG lying on his back motionless, and the woman standing there with his weapons, one in each hand. 26. What stupefied Gladia most in that one dizzying moment was that Daniil had not moved in either prevention or reprisal. But even as the thought struck her, it was out of date, for Daniil had already caught the woman's left wrist and twisted it, saying, "Drop those weapons at once," in a harsh, peremptory voice she had never heard him use before. It was inconceivable that he should so address a human being. The woman said just as harshly in her higher register, "You are not a human being." Her right arm came up, and she fired the weapon it held. For a moment a faint glow flickered over Daniil's body, and Gladia, unable to make a sound in her state of shock, felt her sight dim. She had never in her life fainted, but this seemed a prelude. Daniil did not dissolve, nor was there an explosive report. Daniil, Gladia realized, had prudently seized the arm that held the blaster. The other held the neuronic whip, and it was that which had been discharged in full and at close range upon Daniil. Had he been human, the massive stimulation of his sensory nerves might well have killed him or left him permanently disabled. Yet he was, after all, however human in appearance, a robot, and his equivalent of a nervous system did not react to the whip. Daniil seized the other arm now, forcing it up. He said again, "Drop those weapons, or I will tear each arm from its socket." "Will you?" said the woman. Her arms contracted, and for a moment Daniil was lifted off the ground. Daniil's legs swung backward, then forward, pendulum-like, using the points where the arms joined as a pivot. His feet struck the woman with force, and both fell heavily to the ground. Gladia, without putting the thought into words, realized that, although the woman looked as human as Daniil did, she was just as non-human. A sense of instant outrage flooded Gladia, who was suddenly Solarian to the core, outrage that a robot should use force on a human being. Granted that she might somehow have recognized Daniil for what he was, but how dare she strike DG? Gladia was running forward, screaming. It never occurred to her to fear a robot simply because it had knocked down a strong man with a blow and was battling an even stronger robot to a draw. "How dare you!" she screamed in a Solarian accent so thick that it grated on her own ear. But how else does one speak to a Solarian robot? "How dare you, girl! Stop all resistance immediately!" The woman's muscles seemed to relax totally and simultaneously, as though an electric current had suddenly been shut off. Her beautiful eyes looked at Gladia without enough humanity to seem startled. She said in an indistinct, hesitating voice, "My regrets, madam." Daniil was on his feet, staring down watchfully at the woman who lay on the grass. DG, suppressing a groan, was struggling upright. Daniil bent for the weapons, but Gladia waved him away furiously. "Give me those weapons, girl," she said. The woman said, "Yes, madam." Gladia snatched at them, chose the blaster swiftly, and handed it to Daniil. "Destroy her when that seems best, Daniil. That's an order." She handed the neuronic whip to DG and said, "This is useless here, except against me and yourself. Are you all right?" "No, I'm not all right," muttered DG, rubbing one hip. "Do you mean she's a robot?" "Would a woman have thrown you like that?" "Not any whom I have ever met before. I said there might be special robots on Solaria who were programmed to be dangerous." "Of course," said Gladia unkindly. "But when you saw something that looked like your idea of a beautiful woman, you forgot." "Yes, it is easy to be wise after the fact." Gladia sniffed and turned again to the robot. "What is your name, girl?" "I am called Landery, madam." "Get up, Landery." Landery rose much as Daniil had, as though she were on springs. Her struggle with Daniil seemed to have left her totally unharmed. Gladia said, "Why, against the first law, have you attacked these human beings?" "Madam," said Landery firmly, "these are not human beings." "And do you say that I am not a human being?" "No, madam, you are a human being." "Then, as a human being, I am defining these two men as human beings. Do you hear me?" "Madam," said Landery a little more softly, "these are not human beings." "They are indeed human beings, because I tell you they are. You are forbidden to attack them or harm them in any way." Landery stood mute. "Do you understand what I have said?" Gladia's voice grew more Solarian still as she reached for greater intensity. "Madam," said Landery, "these are not human beings." Daniil said to Gladia softly, "Madam, she has been given orders of such firmness that you cannot easily countervail them." "We'll see about that," said Gladia, breathing quickly. Landery looked about. The group of robots, during the few minutes of conflict, had come closer to Gladia and her two companions. In the background were two robots who, Gladia decided, were not members of the original group, and they were carrying between them, with some difficulty, a large and very massive device of some sort. Landery gestured to them, and they moved forward a bit more quickly. Gladia cried out, "Robots, stop!" They stopped. Landery said, "Madam, I am fulfilling my duties. I am following my instructions." Gladia said, "Your duty, girl, is to obey my orders." Landery said, "I cannot be ordered to disobey my instructions." Gladia said, "Daniil, blast her." Afterward, Gladia was able to reason out what had happened. Daniil's reaction time was much faster than a human being's would have been, and he knew that he was facing a robot against which the three laws did not inhibit violence. However, she looked so human that even the precise knowledge that she was a robot did not totally overcome his inhibition. He followed the order more slowly than he should have. Landery, whose definition of human being was clearly not the one Daniil used, was not inhibited by his appearance, and she struck the more quickly. She had her grip on the blaster, and again the two struggled. DG turned his neuronic whip butt first and came in at a half-run to strike. He hit her head squarely, but it had no effect on the robot, and her legs sent him flailing backward. Gladia said, "Robot, stop!" Her clenched hands were raised. Landery shouted in a stentorian contralto, "All of you, join me! The two apparent males are not human beings. Destroy them without harming the female in any way." If Daniil could be inhibited by a human appearance, the same was true in considerably greater intensity for the simple Solarian robots, who inched forward slowly and intermittently. "Stop!" shrieked Gladia. The robot stopped, but the order had no effect on Landery. Daniil held fast to the blaster, but was bending backward under the force of Landery's apparently greater strength. Gladia, in distraction, looked about as though hoping to find some weapon somewhere. DG was attempting to manipulate his radio transmitter. He said, grunting, "It's been damaged. I think I fell on it." "What do we do?" "We have to make it back to the ship, quickly." Gladia said, "Then run. I can't abandon Daniil." She faced the battling robots, crying out wildly, "Landery, stop! Landery, stop!" "I must not stop, madam," said Landery. "My instructions are precise." Daniil's fingers were forced open, and Landery had the blaster again. Gladia threw herself before Daniil. "You must not harm this human being." "Madam," said Landery, her blaster pointed at Gladia, unwavering, "you are standing in front of something that looks like a human being, but is not a human being. My instructions are to destroy such on sight." Then, in a louder voice, "You two porters, to the ship." The two robots, carrying the massive device between them, renewed their forward movement. "Robots, stop!" screamed Gladia, and the forward motion stopped. The robots trembled in place, as though attempting to move forward, and yet not quite able to do so. Gladia said, "You cannot destroy my human friend Daniil without destroying me, and you yourself admit that I am a human being, and therefore must not be harmed." Daniil said in a low voice, "My lady, you must not draw harm upon yourself in an effort to protect me." Landery said, "This is useless, madam. I can remove you easily from your present position, and then destroy the non-human being behind you. Since that may harm you, I ask you with all respect to move from your present position voluntarily." "You must, my lady," said Daniil. "No, Daniil. I'll stay here. In the time it will take her to move me, you run." "I cannot run faster than the beam of a blaster, and if I try to run she will shoot through you rather than not at all. Her instructions are probably that firm. I regret, my lady, that this will cause you unhappiness." And Daniil lifted the struggling Gladia and tossed her lightly to one side. Landery's finger tightened on the contact, but never completed the pressure. She remained motionless. Gladia, who had staggered to a sitting position, got to her feet. Cautiously, DG, who had remained in place during the last exchanges, approached Landery. Daniil, quite calmly, reached out and took the blaster from her unresisting fingers. "I believe," said Daniil, "that this robot is permanently deactivated." He pushed her gently, and she fell over in one piece, with her limbs, torso, and head in the relative positions they occupied when she was standing. Her arm was still bent, her hand was holding an invisible blaster, and her finger was pressing on an invisible contact. Through the trees to one side of the grassy field, on which the drama had played itself out, Giscard was approaching, his robotic face showing no signs of curiosity, though his words might have. "What has taken place in my absence?" he asked. 27. The walk back to the ship was rather anticlimactic. Now that the frenzy of fear and action was over, Gladia felt hot and cross. DG limped rather painfully, and they progressed slowly, partly because of the limp, and partly because the two Solarian robots were still carrying their massive instrument, plodding along under its weight. DG looked over his shoulder at them. "They obey my orders now that the Overseer is out of action." Gladia said through her teeth, "Why didn't you run at the end and get help? Why did you remain helplessly watching?" "Well," said DG, with an attempt at the kind of lightness he would have showed easily were he feeling better, With you refusing to leave Daniil, I rather hesitated to play the coward by comparison. You fool! I was safe. She would not have harmed me. Daniil said, Madam, it distresses me to contradict you, but I think she would have done so as her urge to destroy me grew stronger. Gladia turned on him hotly. And that was a smart thing you did, pushing me out of the way. Did you want to be destroyed? Rather than see you harmed, madam, yes. My failure to stop the robot through inhibitions set up by her human appearance demonstrated, in any case, an unsatisfactory limit to my usefulness to you. Even so, said Gladia, she would have hesitated to shoot me since I am human for a perceptible period of time, and you could have had the blaster in your own possession by that time. I couldn't gamble your life, madam, on anything as uncertain as her hesitation, said Daniil. And you, said Gladia, showing no signs of having heard Daniil, and turning to DG again, shouldn't have brought the blaster in the first place. DG said, frowning, Madam, I am making allowances for the fact that we have all been very close to death. The robots do not mind that, and I have grown somehow accustomed to danger. To you, however, this was an unpleasant novelty, and you are being childish as a result. I forgive you, a little. But please listen, there was no way I could have known the blaster would be taken from me so easily. Had I not brought the weapon, the Overseer could have killed me with her bare hands as quickly and as effectively as she could have by blaster. Nor was there any point in my running. To answer an earlier complaint of yours, I could not outrun a blaster. Now, please continue if you must still get it out of your system, but I do not intend to reason with you any further. Gladia looked from DG to Daniil and back, and said in a low voice, I suppose I am being unreasonable. Very well, no more hindsights. They had reached the ship. Crew members poured out at the sight of them. Gladia noticed they were armed. DG beckoned to his second-in-command. Oh, sir, I presume you see that object the two robots are carrying? Yes, sir. Well, have them carry it on board. Have it put in the security room and kept there. The security room is then to be locked and kept locked. He turned away for a moment, then turned back. And, oh, sir, as soon as that is done, we will prepare to take off again. Oser said, Captain, shall we keep the robots as well? No. They are too simple in design to be worth much, and, under the circumstances, taking them would create undesirable consequences. The device they are carrying is much more valuable than they are. Giscard watched the device being slowly and very carefully maneuvered into the ship. He said, Captain, I am guessing that is a dangerous object. I'm under that impression, too, said DG. I suspect that the ship would have been destroyed soon after we were. That thing? Said Gladia. What is it? I can't be certain, but I believe it is a nuclear intensifier. I've seen experimental models on Bailey World, and this looks like a big brother. What is a nuclear intensifier? As the name implies, Lady Gladia, it's a device that intensifies nuclear fusion. How does it do that? DG shrugged. I'm not a physicist, my lady. A stream of W particles is involved, and they mediate the weak interaction. That's all I know about it. What does that do? Asked Gladia. Well, suppose the ship has its power supply, as it has right now, for instance. There are small numbers of protons, derived from our hydrogen fuel supply, that are ultra-hot and fusing to produce power. Additional hydrogen is constantly being heated to produce free protons, which, when hot enough, also fuse to maintain that power. If the stream of W particles from the nuclear intensifier strikes the fusing protons, these fuse more quickly and deliver more heat. That heat produces protons and sets them to fusing more quickly than they should be, and their fusion produces still more heat, which intensifies the vicious cycle. In a tiny fraction of a second, enough of the fuel fuses to form a tiny thermonuclear bomb, and the entire ship and everything upon it is vaporized. Gladia looked awed. Why doesn't everything ignite? Why doesn't the whole planet blow up? I don't suppose there's danger of that, madam. The protons have to be ultra-hot and fusing. Cold protons are so unapt to fuse that even when the tendency is intensified to the full extent of such a device, that still is not enough to allow fusion. At least that's what I gathered from a lecture I once attended, and nothing but hydrogen is affected as far as I know. Even in the case of ultra-hot protons, the heat produced does not increase without measure. The temperature cools with distance from the intensifier beam, so that only a limited amount of fusion can be forced. Enough to destroy the ship, of course, but there's no question of blowing up the hydrogen-rich oceans, for instance, even if part of the ocean were ultra-heated, and certainly not if it were cold. But if the machine gets turned on accidentally in the storage room, I don't think it can get turned on. DG opened his hand, and in it rested a 2-centimeter cube of polished metal. From what little I know of such things, this is an activator, and the nuclear intensifier can do nothing without it. Are you sure? Not entirely. But we'll just have to chance it, since I must get that thing back to Bailey World. Now let's get on board. Gladys and her 2 robots moved up the gangplank and into the ship. DG followed and spoke briefly to some of his officers. He then said to Gladys, his weariness beginning to show, "It will take us a couple of hours to place all our gear on board and be ready for takeoff, and every moment increases the danger." Danger? You don't suppose that fearful woman robot is the only one of its kind that may exist on Solaria, do you? Or that the nuclear intensifier we have captured is the only one of its kind? I suppose it will take time for other humanoid robots and other nuclear intensifiers to be brought to this spot. Perhaps considerable time, but we must give them as little as possible. And in the meantime, madam, let us go to your room and conduct some necessary business. What necessary business would that be, Captain? Well, said DG, motioning them forward, in view of the fact that I may have been victimized by treason, I think I will conduct a rather informal court-martial. 28. DG said after seating himself with an audible groan, "What I really want is a hot shower, a rub-down, a good meal, and a chance to sleep. But that will all have to wait till we're off the planet. It will have to wait in your case, too, madam. Some things will not wait, however. My question is this. Where were you, Giscard, while the rest of us were faced with considerable danger?" Giscard said, "Captain, it did not seem to me that if robots alone were left on the planet, they would represent any danger. Moreover, Daniil remained with you." Daniil said, "Captain, I agreed that Giscard would reconnoiter, and that I would remain with Madame Gladia and with you." "You two agreed, did you?" said DG. "Was anyone else consulted?" "No, Captain," said Giscard. "If you were certain that the robots were harmless, Giscard, how did you account for the fact that 2 ships were destroyed?" "It seemed to me, Captain, that there must remain human beings on the planet, but that they would do their best not to be seen by you. I wanted to know where they were and what they were doing. I was in search of them, covering the ground as rapidly as I could. I questioned the robots I met." "Did you find any human beings?" "No, Captain." "Did you examine the house out of which the overseer emerged?" "No, Captain, but I was certain there were no human beings within it. I still am." "It contained the overseer?" "Yes, Captain, but the overseer was a robot." "A dangerous robot." "To my regret, Captain, I did not realize that." "You feel regret, do you?" "It is an expression I choose to describe the effect on my positronic circuits. It is a rough analogy to the term as human beings seem to use it, Captain." "How is it you didn't realize a robot might be dangerous?" "By the 3 laws of robotics—" Gladia interrupted. "Stop this, Captain. Giscard only knows what he is programmed to know. No robot is dangerous to human beings unless there is a deadly quarrel between human beings and the robot must attempt to stop it. In such a quarrel, Daniil and Giscard would undoubtedly have defended us with as little harm to others as possible." "Is that so?" DG put 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and pinched. "Daniil did defend us. We were fighting robots, not human beings, so he had no problem in deciding whom to defend and to what extent. Yet he showed astonishing lack of success, considering that the 3 laws do not prevent him from doing harm to robots. Giscard remained out of it, returning at the precise moment when it was over. Is it possible that there is a bond of sympathy among robots? Is it possible that robots, when defending human beings against robots, somehow feel what Giscard calls regret at having to do so, and perhaps fail or absent themselves? No, exploded Gladia forcefully. No, said D.G. Well, I don't pretend to be an expert roboticist. Are you, Lady Gladia? I am not a roboticist of any sort, said Gladia, but I have lived with robots all my life. What you suggest is ridiculous. Daniil was quite prepared to give his life for me, and Giscard would have done the same. Would any robot have done so? Of course. And yet this overseer, this Landerie, was quite ready to attack me and destroy me. Let us grant that, in some mysterious way, she detected that Daniil, despite appearances, was as much a robot as she herself was, despite appearances, and that she had no inhibitions when it came to harming him. How is it, though, that she attacked me when I am unquestionably a human being? She hesitated at you, admitting you were human, but not me. How could a robot discriminate between the two of us? Was she, perhaps, not really a robot? She was a robot, said Gladia. Of course she was. But the truth is, I don't know why she acted as she did. I have never before heard of such a thing. I can only suppose that the Solarians, having learned how to construct humanoid robots, designed them without the protection of the three laws, though I would have sworn that the Solarians, of all spacers, would have been the last to do so. Solarians are so outnumbered by their own robots as to be utterly dependent on them, to a far greater extent than any other spacers are, and for that reason they fear them more. Subservience and even a bit of stupidity were built into all Solarian robots. The three laws were stronger on Solaria than anywhere else, not weaker. Yet I can think of no other way of explaining Landerie than to suppose that the first law was— Daniil said, Excuse me, Madame Gladia, for interrupting. May I have your permission to attempt an explanation of the overseer's behavior? D.G. said sardonically, It comes to that, I suppose. Only a robot can explain a robot. Sir, said Daniil, unless we understand the overseer, we might not be able to take effective measures in the future against the Solarian danger. I believe I have a way of accounting for her behavior. Go ahead, said D.G. The overseer, said Daniil, did not take instant measures against us. She stood and watched us for a while, apparently uncertain as to how to proceed. When you, Captain, approached and addressed her, she announced that you were not human and attacked you instantly. When I intervened and cried out that she was a robot, she announced that I was not human and attacked me at once, too. When Lady Gladia came forward, however, shouting at her, the overseer recognized her as human and, for a while, allowed herself to be dominated. Yes, I remember all that, Daniil. But what does it mean? It seems to me, Captain, that it is possible to alter a robot's behavior fundamentally without ever touching the three laws, provided, for instance, that you alter the definition of a human being. A human being, after all, is only what it is defined to be. Is that so? What do you consider a human being to be? Daniil was not concerned with the presence or absence of sarcasm. He said, I was constructed with a detailed description of the appearance and behavior of human beings, Captain. Anything that fits that description is a human being to me. Thus, you have the appearance and the behavior, while the overseer had the appearance but not the behavior. To the overseer, on the other hand, the key property of a human being was speech, Captain. The Solarian accent is a distinctive one, and to the overseer something that looked like a human being was defined as a human being only if it spoke like a Solarian. Apparently, anything that looked like a human being but did not speak with a Solarian accent was to be destroyed without hesitation, as was any ship carrying such beings. D.G. said thoughtfully, You may be right. You have a subtler accent, Captain, as distinctive in its way as the Solarian accent is, but the two are widely different. As soon as you spoke, you defined yourself as non-human to the overseer, who announced that and attacked. And you speak with an Auroran accent, and were likewise attacked. Yes, Captain, but Lady Gladia spoke with an authentic Solarian accent, and so she was recognized as human. D.G. considered the matter silently for a while, then said, That's a dangerous arrangement, even for those who would make use of it. If a Solarian, for any reason, at any time, addressed such a robot in a way that the robot did not consider an authentic Solarian accent, that Solarian would be attacked at once. If I were a Solarian, I would be afraid to approach such a robot. My very effort to speak pure Solarian might very likely throw me off and get me killed. "I agree, Captain," said Daniil, "and I would imagine that that is why those who manufacture robots do not ordinarily limit the definition of a human being, but leave it as broad as possible. The Solarians, however, have left the planet. One might suppose that the fact that overseer robots have this dangerous programming is the best indication that the Solarians have really left, and are not here to encounter the danger. The Solarians, it appears, are at this moment concerned only that no one who is not a Solarian be allowed to set foot on the planet." "Not even other spacers?" "I would expect, Captain, that it would be difficult to define a human being in such a way as to include the dozens of different spacer accents, and yet exclude the scores of different settler accents. Keying the definition to the distinctive Solarian accent alone would be difficult enough." DG said, "You are very intelligent, Daniil. I disapprove of robots, of course, not in themselves, but as an unsettling influence on society. And yet, with a robot such as yourself at my side, as you were once at the Ancestors—" Gladia interrupted. "I'm afraid not, DG. Daniil will never be a gift, nor will he ever be sold, nor can he be easily taken by force." DG lifted his hand in a smiling negative. "I was merely dreaming, Lady Gladia. I assure you that the laws of Bailey World would make my possession of a robot unthinkable." Giscard said suddenly, "May I have your permission, Captain, to add a few words?" DG said, "Ah, the robot who managed to avoid the action, and who returned when all was safely over." "I regret that matters appear to be as you have stated. May I have your permission, Captain, to add a few words notwithstanding?" "Well, go on." "It would seem, Captain, that your decision to bring the Lady Gladia with you on this expedition has worked out very well. Had she been absent, and had you ventured on your exploratory mission with only members of the ship's crew as companions, you would all have been quickly killed and the ship destroyed. It was only Lady Gladia's ability to speak like a Solarian and her courage in facing the Overseer that changed the outcome." "Not so," said DG, "for we would all have been destroyed, possibly even Lady Gladia, but for the fortuitous event that the Overseer spontaneously inactivated." "It was not fortuitous, Captain," said Giscard, "and it is extremely unlikely that any robot will inactivate spontaneously. There has to be a reason for inactivation, and I can suggest one possibility. Lady Gladia ordered the robot to stop on several occasions, as friend Daniil has told me, but the instructions under which the Overseer worked were more forceful. Nevertheless, Lady Gladia's actions served to blunt the Overseer's resolution, Captain. The fact that Lady Gladia was an undoubted human being, even by the Overseer's definition, and that she was acting in such a way as to make it necessary, perhaps, for the Overseer to harm her, or even kill her, blunted it even farther. Thus, at the crucial moment, the two contrary requirements, having to destroy non-human beings and having to refrain from harming human beings, balanced, and the robot froze, unable to do anything. Its circuits burned out." Gladia's brows drew together in a puzzled frown. "But—" she began and then subsided. Giscard went on. "It strikes me that it might be well for you to inform the crew of this. It might well ease their distrust of Lady Gladia if you stress what her initiative and courage have meant to every man in the crew, since it has kept them alive. It might also give them an excellent opinion of your own foresight in insisting on having her on board on this occasion, perhaps even against the advice of your own officers." DG let loose a great shout of laughter. "Lady Gladia, I see now why you will not be separated from these robots. They are not only as intelligent as human beings, they are every bit as devious. I congratulate you on your having them. And now, if you don't mind, I must hurry the crew. I don't want to stay on Solaria for one moment more than necessary, and I promise you that you won't be disturbed for hours. I know you can use freshening and rest as much as I can." After he was gone, Gladia remained for a while in deep thought, then turned to Giscard and said in Auroran Common, a patter version of Galactic Standard that was widespread on Aurora and difficult for any non-Auroran to understand. "Giscard, what is all this nonsense about the burning out of circuits?" "My lady," said Giscard, "I advanced it only as a possibility and nothing more. I thought it well to emphasize your role in putting an end to the Overseer." "But how could you think he would believe that a robot could burn out that easily?" "He knows very little about robots, madam. He may traffic in them, but he is from a world that doesn't make use of them." "Yet I know a great deal about them, and so do you. The Overseer showed no signs whatever of balancing circuits, no stuttering, no trembling, no behavior difficulty of any kind. It just stopped." Giscard said, "Madam, since we do not know the precise specifications to which the Overseer was designed, we may have to be content with ignorance as to the rationale behind the freeze." Gladia shook her head. "Just the same. It's puzzling." Part 3. Bailey World. Chapter 8. The Settler World. 29. DG's ship was in space again, surrounded by the everlasting changelessness of the endless vacuum. It had not come too soon for Gladia, who had but imperfectly suppressed the tension that arose from the possibility that a second Overseer, with a second intensifier, might arrive without warning. The fact that it would be a quick death if it happened, an unexperienced death, was not quite satisfying. The tension had spoiled what would have otherwise been a luxuriant shower, along with various other forms of renewal of comfort. It was not till after actual takeoff, after the coming of the soft, distant buzz of the protonic jets, that she could compose herself to sleep. Odd, she thought as consciousness began to slip away, that space should feel safer than the world of her youth, that she should leave Solaria with even greater relief the second time than she had the first. But Solaria was no longer the world of her youth. It was a world without humanity, guarded over by distorted parodies of humanity, humanoid robots that made a mockery of the gentle Daniil and the thought-filled Giscard. She slept at last, and while she slept, Daniil and Giscard, standing guard, could once more speak to each other. Daniil said, "Friend Giscard, I am quite certain that it was you who destroyed the Overseer." "There was clearly no choice, friend Daniil. It was purely an accident that I arrived in time, for my senses were entirely occupied with searching out human beings, and I found none. Nor would I have grasped the significance of events if it were not for Lady Gladia's rage and despair. It was that which I sensed at a distance, and which caused me to race to the scene, barely in time. In that respect Lady Gladia did save the situation, at least as far as the captain's existence and yours were concerned. I would still have saved the ship, I believe, even if I had arrived too late to save you." He paused a moment and added, "I would have found it most unsatisfactory, friend Daniil, to arrive too late to save you." Daniil said with a grave and formal tone of voice, "I thank you, friend Giscard. I am pleased that you were not inhibited by the human appearance of the Overseer. That had slowed my reactions, as my appearance had slowed hers. Friend Daniil, her physical appearance meant nothing to me, because I was aware of the pattern of her thoughts. That pattern was so limited and so entirely different from the full range of human patterns that there was no need for me to make any effort to identify her in a positive manner. The negative identification as non-human was so clear I acted at once. I was not aware of my action, in fact, until after it had taken place." "I had thought this, friend Giscard, but I wish confirmation lest I misunderstand. May I assume, then, that you feel no discomfort over having killed what was, in appearance, a human being?" "None, since it was a robot." "It seems to me that, had I succeeded in destroying her, I would have suffered some obstruction to the free positronic flow, no matter how thoroughly I understood her to be a robot." The humanoid appearance, friend Daniil, cannot be fought off when that is all one can directly judge by. Seeing is so much more immediate than deducing. It was only because I could observe her mental structure and concentrate on that I could ignore her physical structure. How do you suppose the overseer would have felt if she had destroyed us, judging from her mental structure? She was given exceedingly firm instructions, and there was no doubt in her circuits that you and the captain were non-human by her definition. But she might have destroyed Madame Gladia as well. Of that we cannot be certain, friend Daniil. Had she done so, friend Giscard, would she have survived? Have you any way of telling? Giscard was silent for a considerable period. I had insufficient time to study the mental pattern. I cannot say what her reaction might have been had she killed Madame Gladia. If I imagine myself in the place of the overseer— Daniil's voice trembled and grew slightly lower in pitch. It seems to me that I might kill a human being in order to save the life of another human being, whom there might be some reason to think it was more necessary to save. The action would, however, be difficult and damaging. To kill a human being merely in order to destroy something I considered non-human would be inconceivable. She merely threatened. She did not carry through the threat. Might she have, friend Giscard? How can we say, since we don't know the nature of her instructions? Could the instructions have so completely negated the first law? Giscard said, Your whole purpose in this discussion, I see, has been to raise this question. I advise you to go no further. Daniil said stubbornly, I will put it in the conditional, friend Giscard. Surely what may not be expressed as fact can be advanced as fantasy. If instructions could be hedged about with definitions and conditions, if the instructions could be made sufficiently detailed in a sufficiently forceful manner, might it be possible to kill a human being for a purpose less overwhelming than the saving of the life of another human being? Giscard said tonelessly, I do not know, but I suspect that this might be possible. But then, if your suspicion should be correct, that would imply that it was possible to neutralize the first law under specialized conditions. The first law in that case, and therefore certainly the other laws, might be modified into almost non-existence. The laws, even the first law, might not be an absolute then, but might be whatever those who design robots defined it to be. Giscard said, It is enough, friend Daniil. Go no further. Daniil said, There is one more step, friend Giscard. Partner Elijah would have taken that additional step. He was a human being. He could. I must try. If the laws of robotics, even the first law, are not absolutes, and if human beings can modify them, might it not be that perhaps, under proper conditions, we ourselves might— He stopped. Giscard said faintly, Go no further. Daniil said, a slight hum obscuring his voice, I go no further. There was a silence for a long time. It was with difficulty that the positronic circuitry in each ceased undergoing discords. Finally, Daniil said, Another thought arises. The overseer was dangerous not only because of the set of her instructions, but because of her appearance. It inhibited me, and probably the captain, and could mislead and deceive human beings generally, as I deceived, without meaning to, first-class shipper Nis. He clearly was not aware at first that I was a robot. And what follows from that, friend Daniil? On Aurora, a number of humanoid robots were constructed at the Robotics Institute under the leadership of Dr. Amadiro, after the designs of Dr. Fastov had been obtained. This is well known. What happened to those humanoid robots? The project failed. In his turn, Daniil said, This is well known, but it does not answer the question. What happened to those humanoid robots? One can assume they were destroyed. Such an assumption need not necessarily be correct. Were they, in actual fact, destroyed? That would have been the sensible thing to do. What else was a failure? How do we know the humanoid robots were a failure, except in that they were removed from sight? Isn't that sufficient if they were removed from sight and destroyed? I did not say and destroyed, friend Giscard. That is more than we know. We know only that they were removed from sight. Why should that be so unless they were failures? And if they were not failures, might there be no reason for their being removed from sight? I can think of none, friend Daniil. Think again, friend Giscard. Remember, we are talking now of humanoid robots who, we now think, might from the mere fact of their humanoid nature be dangerous. It has seemed to us in our previous discussion that there was a plan on foot on Aurora to defeat the settlers, drastically, surely, and at a blow. We decided that these plans must be centered on the planet Earth. Am I correct so far? Yes, friend Daniil. Then might it not be that Dr. Amadero is at the focus and center of this plan? His antipathy to Earth has been made plain these 20 decades, and if Dr. Amadero has constructed a number of humanoid robots, where might these have been sent if they have disappeared from view? Remember that if Solarian roboticists can distort the 3 laws, Auroran roboticists can do the same. Are you suggesting, friend Daniil, that the humanoid robots have been sent to Earth? Exactly. They're to deceive the Earth people through their human appearance, and to make possible whatever it is that Dr. Amadero intends as his blow against Earth. You have no evidence for this. Yet it is possible. Consider for yourself the steps of the argument. If that were so, we would have to go to Earth. We would have to be there and somehow prevent the disaster. Yes, that is so. But we cannot go unless Lady Gladia goes, and that is not likely. If you can influence the captain to take this ship to Earth, Madame Gladia would have no choice but to go as well. Giscard said, I cannot without harming him. He is firmly set on going to his own planet of Bailey World. We must maneuver his trip to Earth, if we can, after he has done whatever he plans in Bailey World. Afterward may be too late. I cannot help that. I must not harm a human being. If it is too late, friend Giscard, consider what that would mean. I cannot consider what that would mean. I know only that I cannot harm a human being. Then the first law is not enough, and we must... He could go no farther, and both robots lapsed into helpless silence. 30. Bailey World came slowly into sharper view as the ship approached it. Gladia watched it intently in her cabin's viewer. It was the first time she had ever seen a settler world. She had protested this leg of the journey when she had first been made aware of it by D.G., but he shrugged it off with a small laugh. What would you have, my lady? I must lug this weapon of your people. He emphasized your slightly. To my people, and I must report to them, too. Gladia said coldly, Your permission to take me along to Solaria was granted you by the Auroran Council on the condition that you bring me back. Actually, that is not so, my lady. There may have been some informal understanding to that effect, but there is nothing in writing. No formal agreement. An informal understanding would bind me, or any civilized individual, D.G. I'm sure of that, Madame Gladia, but we traders live by money, and by written signatures on legal documents. I would never, under any circumstances, violate a written contract, or refuse to do that for which I have accepted payment. Gladia's chin turned upward. Is that a hint that I must pay you in order to be taken home? Madam. Come, D.G., don't waste mock indignation on me. If I am to be kept prisoner on your planet, say so and tell me why. Let me know exactly where I stand. You are not my prisoner, and will not be. In fact, I will honor this unwritten understanding. I will take you home. Eventually. First, however, I must go to Bailey World, and you must come with me. Why must I come with you? The people of my world will want to see you. You are the heroine of Solaria. You saved us. You can't deprive them of a chance of shouting themselves hoarse for you. Besides, you were the good friend of the ancestor. What do they know, or think they know, of that? Gladia said sharply. D.G. grinned. Nothing to your discredit, I assure you. You are a legend, and legends are larger than life, though I admit it would be easy for a legend to be larger than you, my lady, and a good deal nobler. Ordinarily, I wouldn't want you on the world, because you couldn't live up to the legend. You're not tall enough,
beautiful enough, majestic enough. But when the story of Solaria comes out, you will suddenly meet all requirements. In fact, they may not want to let you go. We must remember we are talking of Bailey World, the planet on which the story of the ancestor is taken more seriously than on any other, and you are part of the story.
You are not to use that as an excuse to keep me in prison.
I promise you I won't, and I promise I will get you home when I can. When I can.
Gladia did not remain as indignant somehow as she felt she had every right to be. She did want to see what a settler world was like, and, after all, this was Elijah Bailey's peculiar world. His son had founded it. He himself had spent his last decades here. On Bailey World there would be remnants of him, the name of the planet, his descendants, his legend. So she watched the planet and thought of Elijah. 31. The watching brought her little, and she felt disappointed. There was not much to be seen through the cloud layer that covered the planet. From her relatively small experience as a space traveler, it seemed to her that the cloud layer was denser than usual for inhabited planets. They would be landing within hours now, and the signal light flashed, and Gladia scrambled to push the hold button in answer. A few moments more, and she pushed the enter button. DG came in, smiling. "Inconvenient moment, my lady?" "Not really," said Gladia. "Simply a matter of putting on my gloves and inserting my nose plugs. I suppose I should wear them all the time, but both grow tiresome, and for some reason I grow less concerned about infection."
"Familiarity breeds contempt, my lady."
"Let's not call it contempt," said Gladia, who found herself smiling.
"Thank you," said DG. "We'll be landing soon, madam, and I have brought you a coverall, carefully sterilized and placed inside this plastic bag, so that it has since been untouched by settler hands. It's simple to put on. You'll have no trouble, and you'll find it covers everything but the nose and eyes."
"Just for me, DG?"
"No, no, my lady. We all wear such things when outdoors at this season of the year. It is winter in our capital city at the present time, and it is cold. We live on a rather cold world, heavy cloud cover, much precipitation, often snow."
"Even in the tropical regions?"
"No, there it tends to be hot and dry. The population clusters in the cooler regions, however. We rather like it. It's bracing and stimulating. The seas, which were seeded with earth species of life, are fertile, so that fish and other creatures have multiplied abundantly. There's no food shortage, consequently, even though land agriculture is limited and will never be the breadbasket of the galaxy. The summers are short but quite hot, and the beaches are then well populated, although you might find them uninteresting since we have a strong nudity taboo."
"It seems like peculiar weather."
"A matter of land-sea distribution, a planetary orbit that is a bit more eccentric than most, and a few other things. Frankly, I don't bother with it." He shrugged. "It's not my field of interest."
"You're a trader. I imagine you're not on the planet often."
"True, but I'm not a trader in order to escape. I like it here. And yet perhaps I would like it less if I were here more. If we look at it that way, Bailey World's harsh conditions serve an important purpose. They encourage trading. Bailey World produces men who scour the seas for food, and there's a certain similarity between sailing the seas and sailing through space. I would say fully a third of all the traders plying the space lanes are Bailey people."
"You seem in a semi-manic state, DG," said Gladia.
"Do I? I think of myself right now as being in a good humor. I have reason to be. So have you."
"Oh?"
"It's obvious, isn't it? We got off Solaria alive. We know exactly what the Solarian danger is. We've gained control of an unusual weapon that should interest our military, and you will be the heroine of Bailey World. The world officials already know the outline of events and are eager to greet you. For that matter, you're the heroine of this ship. Almost every man on board volunteered to bring you this coverall. They are all anxious to get close and bathe in your aura, so to speak."
"Quite a change," said Gladia dryly.
"Absolutely. Nis, the crewman whom your Daniil chastised."
"I remember well, DG.
"He is anxious to apologize to you, and bring his 4 mates so that they too might apologize, and to kick in your presence the one of them who made an improper suggestion. He is not a bad person, my lady." I am certain he isn't. Assure him he is forgiven and the incident forgotten. And if you'll arrange matters, I will shake hands with him and perhaps some of the others before debarking. But you mustn't let them crowd about me. I understand, but I can't guarantee there won't be a certain amount of crowding in Baileytown. That's the capital city of Bailey World. There's no way of stopping various government officials from trying to gain political advantage by being seen with you while grinning away and bowing. Jehoshaphat, as your ancestor would say. Don't say that once we land, madam. It's an expression reserved for him. It is considered bad taste for anyone else to say it. There'll be speeches and cheering and all kinds of meaningless formalities. I'm sorry, my lady. She said thoughtfully, I could do without it, but I suppose there's no way of stopping it. No way, my lady. How long will it continue? Till they get tired. Several days, perhaps, but there'll be a certain variety to it. And how long do we stay on the planet? Till I get tired. I'm sorry, my lady, but I have much to do. Places to go, friends to see, women to make love to. Alas for human frailty, said D.G., grinning broadly. You're doing everything but slobber. A weakness. I can't bring myself to slobber. Gladia smiled. You're not totally committed to sanity, are you? I never claimed to be. But leaving that aside, I also have to consider such dull matters as the fact that my officers and crew would want to see their families and friends, catch up on their sleep, and have a little planet-side fun. And if you want to consider the feelings of inanimate objects, the ship will have to be repaired, refurbished, refreshed, and refueled. Little things like that. How long will all those little things take? It could be months. Who knows? And what do I do meanwhile? You could see our world, broaden your horizons. But your world is not exactly the playground of the galaxy. Too true, but we'll try to keep you interested. He looked at his watch. One more warning, madam. Do not refer to your age. What cause would I have to do that? It might show up in some casual reference. You'll be expected to say a few words, and you might say, for instance, in all my more than 23 decades of life, I have never been so glad to see anyone as I am to see the people of Bailey World. If you're tempted to say anything like that initial clause, resist it. I will. I have no intention of indulging in hyperbole in any case. But as a matter of idle curiosity, why not? Simply because it is better for them not to know your age. But they do know my age, don't they? They know I was your ancestor's friend, and they know how long ago he lived. Or are they under the impression, she looked at him narrowly, that I'm a distant descendant of the Gladia? No, they know who you are and how old you are, but they know it only with their heads. He tapped his forehead. And few people have working heads, as you may have noticed. Yes, I have, even on Aurora. That's good. I wouldn't want the settlers to be special in this respect. Well, then, you have the appearance of... He paused judiciously. 40, maybe 45. And they'll accept you as that in their guts, which is where the average person's real thinking mechanism is located, if you don't rub it in about your real age. Does it really make a difference? Does it? Look, the average settler really doesn't want robots. He has no liking for robots, no desire for robots. There we are satisfied to differ from the spacers. Long life is different. 40 decades is considerably more than 10. Few of us actually reach the 40-decade mark, and few of us actually reach the 10-decade mark. We teach the advantage of short life. Quality versus quantity, evolutionary speed, ever-changing world, but nothing really makes people happy about living 10 decades when they imagine they could live 40. So, past a point, the propaganda produces a backlash, and it's best to keep quiet about it. They don't often see spacers, as you can imagine, and so they don't have occasion to grind their teeth over the fact that spacers look young and vigorous, even when they are twice as old as the oldest settler who ever lived. They'll see that in you. And if they think about it, it will unsettle them. Gladia said bitterly, Would you like to have me make a speech and tell them exactly what 40 decades means? Shall I tell them for how many years one outlives the springtime of hope, to say nothing of friends and acquaintances? Shall I tell them of the meaninglessness of children and family, of the endless comings and goings of one husband after another, of the mystic blurring of the informal matings between and alongside, of the coming of the time when you've seen all you want to see and heard all you want to hear, and find it impossible to think a new thought, of how you forget what excitement and discovery are all about, and learn each year how much more intense boredom can become. Bailey people wouldn't believe that. I don't think I do. Is that the way all spacers feel, or are you making it up?
I only know for certain how I myself feel, but I've watched others dim as they aged. I've watched their dispositions sour and their ambitions narrow and their indifferences broaden. D.G.'s lips pressed together and he looked somber. Is the suicide rate high among spacers? I've never heard that it is. It's virtually zero. But that doesn't fit what you're saying. Consider. We're surrounded by robots who are dedicated to keeping us alive. There's no way we can kill ourselves when our sharp-eyed and active robots are forever about us. I doubt that any of us would even think of trying. I wouldn't dream of it myself, if only because I can't bear the thought of what it would mean to all my household robots, and even more so to Daniil and Giscard. They're not really alive, you know. They don't have feelings. Gladia shook her head. You say that only because you've never lived with them. In any case, I think you overestimate the longing for prolonged life among your people. You know my age. You look at my appearance. Yet it doesn't bother you. Because I'm convinced that the spacer worlds must dwindle and die, that it is the settler worlds that are the hope of humanity's future, and that it is our short-lived characteristic that ensures it. Listening to what you've just said, assuming it is all true, makes me the more certain. Don't be too sure. You may develop your own insuperable problems, if you haven't already. That is undoubtedly possible, my lady, but for now I must leave you. The ship is coasting in for a landing, and I must stare intelligently at the computer that controls it, or no one will believe that I am the captain. He left, and she remained in gloomy abstraction for a while, her fingers plucking at the plastic that enclosed the coverall. She had come to a sense of equilibrium on Aurora, a way of allowing life to pass quietly. Meal by meal, day by day, season by season, it had been passing, and the quiet had insulated her almost from the tedious waiting for the only adventure that remained, the final one of death. And now she had been to Solaria, and had awakened the memories of a childhood that had long passed, on a world that had long passed, so that the quiet had been shattered, perhaps forever, and so that she now lay uncovered and bare to the horror of continuing life. What could substitute for the vanished quiet? She caught Giscard's dimly glowing eyes upon her, and she said, "Help me on with this, Giscard." 32. It was cold. The sky was gray with clouds, and the air glittered with a very light snowfall. Patches of powdery snow were swirling in the fresh breeze, and off beyond the landing field Gladia could see distant heaps of snow. There were crowds of people gathered here and there, held off by barriers from approaching too closely. They were all wearing coveralls of different types and colors, and they all seemed to balloon outward, turning humanity into a crowd of shapeless objects with eyes. Some were wearing visors that glittered transparently over their faces. Gladia pressed her mittened hand to her face. Except for her nose, she felt warm enough. The coverall did more than insulate. It seemed to exude warmth of its own. She looked behind her. Daniil and Giscard were within reach, each in a coverall. She had protested that at first. They don't need coveralls. They're not sensitive to cold. I'm sure they're not, D.G. had said. But you say you won't go anywhere without them, and we can't very well have Daniil sitting there exposed to the cold. It would seem against nature. Nor do we wish to arouse hostility by making it too clear you have robots. They must know I've got robots with me, and Giscard's face will give him away even in a coverall. They might know, said D.G., but the chances are they won't think about it if they're not forced to. So let's not force it. Now D.G. was motioning her into a ground car that had a transparent roof and sides. They'll want to see you as we travel, my lady, he said, smiling. Gladia seated herself at one side, and D.G. followed on the other. I'm co-hero, he said. Do you value that? Oh, yes.
It means a bonus for my crew, and a possible promotion for me. I don't scorn that.
Daniil and Giscard entered too, and sat down in seats that faced the two human beings. Daniil faced Gladia, Giscard faced DG. There was a ground car before them, without transparency, and a line of about a dozen behind them. There was the sound of cheering and a forest of arm-waving from the assembled crowd. DG smiled and lifted an arm in response, and motioned to Gladia to do the same. She waved in a perfunctory manner. It was warm inside the car, and her nose had lost its numbness. She said, "There's a rather unpleasant glitter to these windows. Can that be removed?"
"Undoubtedly, but it won't be," said DG. "That's as unobtrusive a force field as we can set up. Those are enthusiastic people out there, and they've been searched, but someone may have managed to conceal a weapon, and we don't want you hurt."
"You mean someone might try to kill me?" Daniil's eyes were calmly scanning the crowd to one side of the car. Giscard scanned the other.
"Very unlikely, my lady. But you're a spacer, and settlers don't like spacers. A few might hate them with such a surpassing hatred as to see only the spacerness in you. But don't worry. Even if someone were to try, which is, as I say, unlikely, they won't succeed."
The line of cars began to move, all together and very smoothly. Gladia half rose in astonishment. There was no one in front of the partition that closed them off. "Who's driving?" she asked.
"The cars are thoroughly computerized," said DG. "I take it that spacer cars are not."
"We have robots to drive them." DG continued waving, and Gladia followed his lead automatically.
"We don't," he said.
"But a computer is essentially the same as a robot."
"A computer is not humanoid, and it does not obtrude itself on one's notice. Whatever the technological similarities might be, they are worlds apart psychologically."
Gladia watched the countryside and found it oppressively barren. Even allowing for winter, there was something desolate in the scattering of leafless bushes and in the sparsely distributed trees, whose stunted and dispirited appearance emphasized the death that seemed to grip everything. DG, noting her depression and correlating it with her darting glances here and there, said, "It doesn't look like much now, my lady. In the summer, though, it's not bad. There are grassy plains, orchards, grain fields." "Forests?"
"Not wilderness forests. We're still a growing world. It's still being molded. We've only had a little over a century and a half, really. The first step was to cultivate home plots for the initial settlers, using imported seed. Then we placed fish and invertebrates of all kinds in the ocean, doing our best to establish a self-supporting ecology. That is a fairly easy procedure, if the ocean chemistry is suitable. If it isn't, then the planet is not habitable without extensive chemical modification, and that has never been tried in actuality, though there are all sorts of plans for such procedures. Finally, we try to make the land flourish, which is always difficult, always slow."
"Have all the settler worlds followed that path?"
"Are following. None are really finished. Bailey World is the oldest, and we're not finished. Given another couple of centuries, the settler worlds will be rich and full of life, land as well as sea, though by that time there will be many still newer worlds that will be working their way through various preliminary stages. I'm sure the spacer worlds went through the same procedure."
"Many centuries ago, and less strenuously, I think, we had robots to help."
"We'll manage," said DG briefly.
"And what about the native life, the plants and animals that evolved on this world before human beings arrived?"
DG shrugged. "Insignificant. Small, feeble things. The scientists are, of course, interested, so the indigenous life still exists in special aquaria, botanical gardens, zoos. There are out-of-the-way bodies of water and considerable stretches of land area that have not yet been converted. Some indigenous life still lives out there in the wild."
"But these stretches of wilderness will eventually all be converted."
"We hope so."
"Don't you feel that the planet really belongs to these insignificant, small, feeble things?"
"No, I'm not that sentimental. The planet and the whole universe belongs to intelligence. The spacers agree with that. Where is the indigenous life of Solaria, or of Aurora?"
The line of cars, which had been progressing tortuously from the spaceport, now came to a flat paved area on which several low domed buildings were evident.
"Capitol Plaza," said DG in a low voice. "This is the official heartbeat of the planet. Government offices are located here, the Planetary Congress meets here, the Executive Mansion is found here, and so on.
I'm sorry, DG, but this is not very impressive. These are small and uninteresting buildings.
DG smiled. You see only an occasional top, my lady. The buildings themselves are located underground, all interconnected. It's a single complex, really, and is still growing. It's a self-contained city, you know. It, along with the surrounding residential areas, makes up Baileytown.
Do you plan to have everything underground eventually? The whole city? The whole world?
Most of us look forward to an underground world, yes.
They have underground cities on Earth, I understand.
Indeed they do, my lady, the so-called caves of steel.
You imitate that here, then?
It's not simple imitation. We add our own ideas, and we're coming to a halt, my lady, and any moment we'll be asked to step out. I'd cling to the coverall openings if I were you. The whistling wind on the plaza in winter is legendary.
Gladia did so, fumbling rather as she tried to put the edges of the openings together. It's not simple imitation, you say?
No, we design our underground with the weather in mind. Since our weather is, on the whole, harsher than Earth's, some modification in architecture is required. Properly built, almost no energy is required to keep the complex warm in winter and cool in summer. In a way, indeed, we keep warm in winter, in part, with the stored warmth of the previous summer, and cool in summer with the coolness of the previous winter.
What about ventilation?
That uses up some of the savings, but not all. It works, my lady, and someday we will match Earth structures. That, of course, is the ultimate ambition, to make Bailey World a reflection of Earth.
I never knew that Earth was so admirable as to make imitation desirable, said Gladia lightly.
DG turned his eyes on her sharply. Make no jokes of that sort, my lady, while you are with settlers, not even with me. Earth is no joking matter.
Gladia said, I'm sorry, DG, I meant no disrespect.
You didn't know. But now you know. Come, let's get out.
The side door of the car slid open noiselessly, and DG turned in his seat and stepped out. He then held out one hand to help Gladia and said, You'll be addressing the Planetary Congress, you know, and every government official who can squeeze in will do so. Gladia, who had stretched out her hand to seize DG's, and who already felt, painfully, the cold wind on her face, shrank back suddenly. I must make an address? I hadn't been told that. DG looked surprised.
I rather thought you would take something of the sort for granted.
Well, I didn't, and I can't make an address. I've never done such a thing.
You must. It's nothing terrible. It's just a matter of saying a few words after some long and boring speeches of welcome.
But what can I possibly say?
Nothing fancy, I assure you. Just peace and love and blah. Give them half a minute's worth. I'll scrawl out something for you if you wish.
And Gladia stepped out of the car, and her robots followed her. Her mind was in a whirl. Chapter 9. The Speech. 33. As they walked into the building, they removed their coveralls and handed them to attendants. Daniil and Giscard removed theirs, too, and the attendants cast sharp glances at the latter, approaching him gingerly. Gladia adjusted her nose plugs nervously. She had never before been in the presence of large crowds of short-lived human beings. Short-lived in part, she knew, or had always been told, because they carried in their bodies chronic infections and hordes of parasites. She whispered, Will I get back my own coverall?
You will wear no one else's, said DG. They will be kept safe and radiation sterilized.
Gladia looked about cautiously. Somehow she felt that even optical contact might be dangerous. Who were those people? She indicated several people who wore brightly colored clothing and were obviously armed.
Security guards, madam,
said DG. Even here, in a government building?
Absolutely. And when we're on the platform, there will be a force field curtain dividing us from the audience.
Don't you trust your own legislature? DG half smiled.
Not entirely. This is a raw world still, and we go our own ways. We haven't had all the edges knocked off, and we don't have robots watching over us. Then, too, we've got militant minority parties. We've got our war hawks.
What are war hawks? Most of the Bailey Worlders had their coveralls removed now and were helping themselves to drinks. There was a buzz of conversation in the air, and many people stared at Gladia, but no one came over to speak to her. Indeed, it was clear to Gladia that there was a circle of avoidance about her. D.G. noticed her glance from side to side and interpreted it correctly. "They've been told," he said, "that you would appreciate a little elbow room. I think they understand your fear of infection." "They don't find it insulting, I hope." "They may, but you've got something that is clearly a robot with you, and most Bailey-worlders don't want that kind of infection, the Warhawks particularly." "You haven't told me what they are." "I will if there's time. You and I and others on the platform will have to move in a little while. Most settlers think that in time the galaxy will be theirs, that the spacers cannot and will not compete successfully in the race for expansion. We also know it will take time. We won't see it. Our children probably won't. It may take 1,000 years for all we know. The Warhawks don't want to wait. They want it settled now." "They want war?" "They don't say that precisely, and they don't call themselves Warhawks. That's what we sensible people call them. They call themselves Earth supremacists. After all, it's hard to argue with people who announce they are in favor of Earth being supreme. We all favor that, but most of us don't necessarily expect it to happen tomorrow, and are not ferociously upset that it won't." "And these Warhawks may attack me, physically?" D.G. gestured for her to move forward. "I think we'll have to get moving, madam. They're getting us into line." "No, I don't think you'll really be attacked, but it's always best to be cautious." Gladia held back as D.G. indicated her place in line. "Not without Daniil and Giscard, D.G. I'm still not going anywhere without them, not even onto the platform, not after what you just told me about the Warhawks." "You're asking a lot, my lady." "On the contrary, D.G., I'm not asking for anything. Take me home right now, with my robots." Gladia watched tensely as D.G. approached a small group of officials. He made a half bow, arms in downward-pointing diagonals. It was what Gladia suspected to be a Bailey-worlder gesture of respect. She did not hear what D.G. was saying, but a painful and quite involuntary fantasy passed through her mind. If there was any attempt to separate her from her robots against her will, Daniil and Giscard would surely do what they could to prevent it. They would move too quickly and precisely to really hurt anyone, but the security guards would use their weapons at once. She would have to prevent that at all costs, pretend she was separating from Daniil and Giscard voluntarily, and ask them to wait behind for her. How could she do that? She had never been entirely without robots in her life. How could she feel safe without them? And yet what other way out of the dilemma offered itself? D.G. returned. "Your status as heroine, my lady, is a useful bargaining chip. And of course I am a persuasive fellow. Your robots may go with you. They will sit on the platform behind you, but there will be no spotlight upon them. And for the sake of the ancestor, my lady, don't call attention to them. Don't even look at them." Gladia sighed with relief. "You're a good fellow, D.G.," she said shakily. "Thank you." She took her place near the head of the line, D.G. at her left, Daniil and Giscard behind her, and behind them a long tail of officials of both sexes. A woman settler, carrying a staff that seemed to be a symbol of office, having surveyed the line carefully, nodded, moved forward to the head of the line, then walked on. Everyone followed. Gladia became aware of music in simple and rather repetitive march rhythm up ahead, and wondered if she were supposed to march in some choreographed fashion. Customs vary infinitely and irrationally from world to world, she told herself. Looking out of the corner of her eye, she noticed D.G. ambling forward in an indifferent way. He was almost slouching. She pursed her lips disapprovingly and walked rhythmically, head erect, spine stiff. In the absence of direction, she was going to march the way she wanted to. They came out upon a stage, and as they did so, chairs rose smoothly from recesses in the floor. The line split up, but D.G. caught her sleeve lightly, and she accompanied him. The two robots followed her. She stood in front of the seat that D.G. quietly pointed to. The music grew loud, but the light was not quite as bright as it had been. And then, after what seemed an almost interminable wait, she felt D.G.'s touch pressing lightly downward. She sat, and so did they all. She was aware of the faint shimmer of the force-field curtain, and beyond that an audience of several thousand. Every seat was filled in an amphitheater that sloped steeply upward. All were dressed in dull colors, browns and blacks, both sexes alike, as nearly as she could tell them apart. The security guards in the aisles stood out in their green and crimson uniforms. No doubt it lent them instant recognition, though Gladia thought it must make them instant targets as well. She turned to D.G. and said in a low voice, "You people have an enormous legislature." D.G. shrugged slightly. "I think everyone in the governmental apparatus is here, with mates and guests. A tribute to your popularity, my lady." She cast a glance over the audience from right to left and back, and tried at the extreme of the arc to catch sight out of the corner of her eye of either Daniil or Giscard, just to be sure they were there. And then she thought rebelliously that nothing would happen because of a quick glance, and deliberately turned her head. They were there. She also caught D.G. rolling his eyes upward in exasperation. She started suddenly as a spotlight fell upon one of the persons on the stage, while the rest of the room dimmed further into shadowy insubstantiality. The spotlighted figure rose and began to speak. His voice was not terribly loud, but Gladia could hear a very faint reverberation bouncing back from the far walls. It must penetrate every cranny of the large hall, she thought. Was it some form of amplification by a device so unobtrusive that she did not see it, or was there a particularly clever acoustical shape to the hall? She did not know, but she encouraged her puzzled speculation to continue, for it relieved her, for a while, of the necessity of having to listen to what was being said. At one point she heard a soft call of Quackenbush from some undetermined point in the audience. But for the perfect acoustics, if that was what it was, it would probably have gone unheard. The word meant nothing to her, but from the soft, brief titter of laughter that swept the audience, she suspected it was a vulgarism. The sound quenched itself almost at once, and Gladia rather admired the depth of the silence that followed. Perhaps if the room were so perfectly acoustic that every sound could be heard, the audience had to be silent, or the noise and confusion would be intolerable. Then, once the custom of silence was established, and audience noise became a taboo, anything but silence would become unthinkable. Except where the impulse to mutter Quackenbush became irresistible, she supposed. Gladia realized that her thinking was growing muddy and her eyes were closing. She sat upright with a small jerk. The people of the planet were trying to honor her, and if she fell asleep during the proceedings, that would surely be an intolerable insult. She tried to keep herself awake by listening, but that seemed to make her sleepier. She bit the inside of her cheeks instead and breathed deeply. 3 officials spoke, one after the other, with semi-merciful semi-brevity, and then Gladia jolted wide awake. Had she been actually dozing despite all her efforts, with thousands of pairs of eyes on her? As the spotlight fell just to her left, and D.G. rose to speak, standing in front of his chair. He seemed completely at ease, with his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Men and women of Bailey World," he began, "officials, lawgivers, honored leaders, and fellow planet folk. You have heard something of what happened on Solaria. You know that we were completely successful. You know that Lady Gladia of Aurora contributed to that success. It is time now to present some of the details to you and to all my fellow planet folk who are watching on hypervision." He proceeded to describe the events in modified form, and Gladia found herself dryly amused at the nature of the modifications. He passed over his own discomfiture at the hands of a humanoid robot lightly. Giscard was never mentioned, Daniil's role was minimized, and Gladia's heavily emphasized. The incident became a duel between 2 women, Gladia and Landerie, and it was the courage and sense of authority of Gladia that had won out. Finally D.G. said, "And now, Lady Gladia, Solarian by birth, Auroran by citizenship, but Bailey Worlder by deed." There was strong applause at the last, the loudest Gladia had yet heard, for the earlier speakers had been but tepidly received. D.G. raised his hands for silence, and it came at once. He then concluded, "Will now address you." Gladia found the spotlight on herself, and turned to D.G. in sudden panic. There was applause in her ears, and D.G., too, was clapping his hands. Under the cover of the applause he leaned toward her and whispered, "You love them all. You want peace. And since you're not a legislator, you're unused to long speeches of small content. Say that, then sit down." She looked at him uncomprehendingly, far too nervous to have heard what he said. She rose and found herself staring at endless tiers of people. 34. Gladia felt very small, not for the first time in her life, to be sure, as she faced the stage. The men on the stage were all taller than she was, and so were the other 3 women. She felt that even though they were all sitting and she was standing, they still towered over her. As for the audience, which was waiting now in almost menacing silence, those who composed it were, she felt quite certain, one and all larger than her in every dimension. She took a deep breath and said, "Friends?" But it came out in a thin, breathless whistle. She cleared her throat in what seemed a thunderous rasp, and tried again. "Friends." This time there was a certain normality to the sound. "You are all descended from Earth people, every one of you. I am descended from Earth people. There are no human beings anywhere on all the inhabited worlds, whether spacer worlds, settler worlds, or Earth itself, that are not either Earth people by birth or Earth people by descent. All other differences fade to nothing in the face of that enormous fact." Her eyelids flickered leftward to look at D.G., and she found that he was smiling very slightly, and that one eyelid trembled as though it were about to wink. She went on, "That should be our guide in every thought and act. I thank you all for thinking of me as a fellow human being, and for welcoming me among you without regard to any other classification in which you might have been tempted to place me. Because of that, and in the hope that the day will soon come when 16 billion human beings living in love and peace will consider themselves as just that and nothing more or less, I think of you not merely as friends, but as kinsmen and kinswomen." There was an outbreak of applause that thundered in upon her, and Gladia half-closed her eyes in relief. She remained standing to let it continue and bathe her in its welcome indication that she had spoken well, and, what was more, enough. When it began to fade, she smiled, bowed to right and left, and began to sit down. And then a voice came out of the audience. "Why don't you speak in Solarian?" She froze halfway to her seat and looked, in shock, at D.G. He shook his head slightly and mouthed soundlessly, "Ignore it." He gestured as unobtrusively as possible that she seat herself. She stared at him for a second or two, then realized what an ungainly sight she must present, with her posterior protruding in the unfinished process of seating herself. She straightened at once, and flashed a smile at the audience as she turned her head slowly from side to side. For the first time she became aware of objects in the rear whose glistening lenses focused upon her. Of course, D.G. had mentioned that the proceedings were being watched via hyperwave. Yet it scarcely seemed to matter now. She had spoken, and had been applauded, and she was facing the audience she could see, erect and without nervousness. What could the unseen addition matter? She said, still smiling, "I consider that a friendly question. You want me to show you my accomplishments. How many want me to speak as a Solarian mind? Don't hesitate. Raise your right hands." A few right arms went up. Gladia said, "The humanoid robot on Solaria heard me speak Solarian. That was what defeated it in the end. Come, let me see everyone who would like a demonstration." More right arms went up, and in a moment the audience became a sea of upraised arms. Gladia felt a hand tweaking at her pants leg, and with a rapid movement she brushed it away. "Very well. You may lower your arms now, kinsmen and kinswomen. Understand that what I speak now is Galactic Standard, which is your language too. I, however, am speaking it as an Auroran would, and I know you all understand me, even though the way I pronounce my words may well strike you as amusing, and my choice of words may on occasion puzzle you a bit. You'll notice that my way of speaking has notes to it, and goes up and down, almost as though I were singing my words. This always sounds ridiculous to anyone not an Auroran, even to other spacers. On the other hand, if I slip into the Solarian way of speaking, as I am now doing, you will notice at once that the notes stop, and that it becomes throaty with R's that just about never let go, especially if there is no R anywhere on the vocal panorama." There was a burst of laughter from the audience, and Gladia confronted it with a serious expression on her face. Finally she held up her arms and made a cutting movement downward and outward, and the laughter stopped. "However," she said,
I will probably never go to Solaria again, so I will have no occasion to use the Solarian dialect any further. And the good Captain Bailey—" She turned and made a half-bow in his direction, noting that there was a distinct outbreak of perspiration on his brow. "Informs me there is no telling when I'll be going back to Aurora, so I may have to drop the Auroran dialect as well. My only choice, then, will be to speak the Bailey World dialect, which I shall at once begin to practice." She hooked the fingers of each hand into an invisible belt, stretched her chest outward, pulled her chin downward, put on D.G.'s unself-conscious grin, and said, in a gravelly attempt at baritone, "Men and women of Bailey World, officials, lawgivers, honored leaders, and fellow planet folk, and that should include everyone except perhaps dishonored leaders." She did her best to include the glottal stops and the flat A's, and carefully pronounced the H of honored and dishonored in what was almost a gasp. The laughter was still louder this time, and more prolonged, and Gladia allowed herself to smile and to wait calmly while it went on and on. After all, she was persuading them to laugh at themselves. And when things were quiet again, she said simply, in an unexaggerated version of the Auroran dialect, "Every dialect is amusing or peculiar to those who are not accustomed to it, and it tends to mark off human beings into separate and frequently mutually unfriendly groups. Dialects, however, are only languages of the tongue. Instead of those, you and I and every other human being on every inhabited world should listen to the language of the heart, and there are no dialects to that. That language, if we will only listen, rings out the same in all of us." That was it. She was ready to sit down again, but another question sounded. It was a woman's voice this time. "How old are you?" Now D.G. forced a low growl between his teeth. "Sit down, madam. Ignore the question." Gladia turned to face D.G. He had half risen. The others on the stage, as nearly as she could see them in the dimness outside the spotlight, were tensely leaning toward her. She turned back to the audience and cried out ringingly, "The people here on the stage want me to sit down. How many of you out there want me to sit down? I find you are silent. How many want me to stand here and answer the question honestly?" There was sharp applause and cries of, "Answer! Answer!" Gladia said, "The voice of the people. I'm sorry, D.G., and all the rest of you, but I am commanded to speak." She looked up at the spotlight, squinting, and shouted, "I don't know who controls the lights, but light the auditorium and turn off the spotlight. I don't care what it does to the hyperwave cameras. Just make sure the sound is going out accurately. No one will care if I look dim, as long as they can hear me. Right?" "Right," came the multi-voiced answer. Then, "Lights! Lights!" Someone on the stage signaled in a distraught manner, and the audience was bathed in light. "Much better," said Gladia. "Now I can see you all, my kinspeople. I would like particularly to see the woman who asked the question, the one who wants to know my age. I would like to speak to her directly. Don't be backward or shy. If you have the courage to ask the question, you should have the courage to ask it openly." She waited, and finally a woman rose in the middle distance. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, the color of her skin was a light brown, and her clothing, worn tightly to emphasize a slim figure, was in shades of darker brown. She said, just a bit stridently, "I'm not afraid to stand up, and I'm not afraid to ask the question again. How old are you?" Gladia faced her calmly, and found herself even welcoming the confrontation. How was this possible? Throughout her first 3 decades she had been carefully trained to find the real presence of even one human being intolerable. Now look at her, facing thousands without a tremble. She was vaguely astonished, and entirely pleased. Gladia said, "Please remain standing, madam, and let us talk together. How shall we measure age? In elapsed years since birth?" The woman said with composure, "My name is Sindra Lambid. I'm a member of the legislature, and therefore one of Captain Bailey's lawgivers and honored leaders. I hope honored, at any rate." There was a ripple of laughter as the audience seemed to grow increasingly good-natured. To answer your question, I think that the number of galactic standard years that have elapsed since birth is the usual definition of a person's age. Thus, I am 54 years old. How old are you? How about just giving us a figure? I will do so. Since my birth, 233 galactic standard years have come and gone, so that I am over 23 decades old, or a little more than 4 times as old as you are. Gladia held herself straight, and she knew that her small, slim figure and the dim light made her look extraordinarily childlike at that moment. There was a confused babble from the audience, and something of a groan from her left. A quick glance in that direction showed her that DG had his hand to his forehead. Gladia said, "But that is an entirely passive way of measuring time-lapse. It is a measure of quantity that takes no account of quality. My life has been spent quietly, one might say dully. I have drifted through a set routine, shielded from all untoward events by a smoothly functioning social system that left no room for either change or experimentation, and by my robots, who stood between me and misadventure of any kind. Only twice in my life have I experienced the breath of excitement, and both times tragedy was involved. When I was 33, younger in years than many of you who are now listening to me, there was a time, not a long one, during which a murder accusation hung over me. 2 years later there was another period of time, not long, during which I was involved in another murder. On both those occasions, plainclothesman Elijah Bailey was at my side. I believe most of you, or perhaps all of you, are familiar with the story as given in the account written by Elijah Bailey's son. I should now add a third occasion. For this last month I have faced a great deal of excitement, reaching its climax with my being required to stand up before you all, something which is entirely different from anything I have ever done in all my long life. And I must admit, it is only your own good nature and kind acceptance of me that makes it possible. Consider, each of you, the contrast of all this with your own lives. You are pioneers, and you live on a pioneer world. This world has been growing all your lives and will continue to grow. This world is anything but settled down, and each day is, and must be, an adventure. The very climate is an adventure. You have first cold, then heat, then cold again. It is a climate rich in wind and storms and sudden change. At no time can you sit back and let time pass drowsily in a world that changes gently or not at all. Many Bailey Welders are traders, or can choose to be traders, and can then spend half their time scouring the space lanes. And if ever this world grows tame, many of its inhabitants can choose to transfer their sphere of activities to another less developed world, or join an expedition that will find a suitable world that has not yet felt the step of human beings, and take their share in shaping it and seeding it and making it fit for human occupancy. Measure the length of life by events and deeds, accomplishments and excitements, and I am a child, younger than any of you. The large number of my years has served merely to bore and weary me, the smaller number of yours to enrich and excite you. So tell me again, Madame Lambid, how old are you? Lambid smiled. 54 good years, Madame Gladia. She sat down, and again the applause welled up and continued. Under cover of that, DG said hoarsely, "Lady Gladia, who taught you how to handle an audience like this?" "No one," she whispered back. "I never tried before." "But quit while you're ahead. The person now getting to his feet is our leading war hawk. There's no need to face him. Say you are tired and sit down. We will tackle old man Bistervan ourselves." "But I'm not tired," said Gladia. "I'm enjoying myself." The man now facing her from her extreme right, but rather near the stage, was a tall, vigorous man with shaggy white eyebrows hanging over his eyes. His thinning hair was also white, and his garments were a somber black, relieved by a white stripe running down each sleeve and trouser leg, as though setting sharp limits to his body. His voice was deep and musical. "My name," he said, "is Thomas Bistervan, and I'm known to many as the Old Man, largely, I think, because they wish I were, and that I would not delay too long in dying. I do not know how to address you, because you do not seem to have a family name, and because I do not know you well enough to use your given name. To be honest, I do not wish to know you that well. Apparently you helped save a Bailey World ship on your world against the booby traps and weapons set up by your people, and we are thanking you for that. In return you have delivered some pious nonsense about friendship and kinship, pure hypocrisy. When have your people felt kin to us? When have the Spacers felt any relationship to Earth and its people? Certainly you Spacers are descended from Earthmen. We don't forget that. Nor do we forget that you have forgotten it. For well over 20 decades the Spacers controlled the galaxy and treated Earth people as though they were hateful, short-lived, diseased animals. Now that we are growing strong, you hold out the hand of friendship, but that hand has a glove on it, as your hands do. You try to remember not to turn up your nose at us, but the nose, even if not turned up, has plugs in it. Well, am I correct?
Gladia held up her hand. It may be, she said, that the audience here in this room, and even more so the audience outside the room that sees me via hyperwave, is not aware that I am wearing gloves. They are not obtrusive, but they are there. I do not deny that. And I have nose plugs that filter out dust and microorganisms without too much interference with breathing. And I am careful to spray my throat periodically. And I wash perhaps a bit more than the requirements of cleanliness alone make necessary. I deny none of it. But this is the result of my shortcomings, not yours. My immune system is not strong. My life has been too comfortable, and I have been exposed to too little. That was not my deliberate choice, but I must pay the penalty for it. If any of you were in my unfortunate position, what would you do? In particular, Mr. Van, what would you do? Mr. Van said grimly, I would do as you do, and I would consider it a sign of weakness, a sign that I was unfit and unadjusted to life, and that I therefore ought to make way for those who are strong. Woman, don't speak of kinship to us. You are no kin of mine. You are of those who persecuted and tried to destroy us when you were strong, and who come whining to us when you are weak. There was a stir in the audience, and by no means a friendly one, but Mr. Van held his ground firmly. Gladia said softly, Do you remember the evil we did when we were strong? Mr. Van said, Don't fear that we will forget. It is in our minds every day. Good. Because now you know what to avoid. You have learned that when the strong oppress the weak, that is wrong. Therefore, when the table turns and when you are strong and we are weak, you will not be oppressive. Ah, yes. I have heard the argument. When you were strong, you never heard of morality, but now that you are weak, you preach it earnestly. In your case, though, when you were weak, you knew all about morality and were appalled by the behavior of the strong, and now that you are strong, you forget morality. Surely it is better that the immoral learn morality through adversity than that the moral forget morality in prosperity. We will give what we received, said Mr. Van, holding up his clenched fist. You should give what you would have liked to receive, said Gladia, holding out her arms as though embracing. Since everyone can think of some past injustice to avenge, what you are saying, my friend, is that it is right for the strong to oppress the weak. And when you say that, you justify the Spacers of the past, and should therefore have no complaint of the present. What I say is that oppression was wrong when we practiced it in the past, and that it will be equally wrong when you practice it in the future. We cannot change the past, unfortunately, but we can still decide on what the future shall be. Gladia paused. When Mr. Van did not answer immediately, she called out, How many want a new galaxy, not the bad old galaxy endlessly repeated? The applause began, but Mr. Van threw his arms up and shouted in stentorian fashion, Wait! Wait! Don't be fools! Stop! There was a slow quieting, and Mr. Van said, Do you suppose this woman believes what she is saying? Do you suppose the Spacers intend us any good whatever? They still think they are strong, and they still despise us, and they intend to destroy us, if we don't destroy them first. This woman comes here, and like fools we greet her and make much of her. Well, put her words to the test. Let any of you apply for permission to visit a Spacer world and see if you can. Or if you have a world behind you and can use threats, as Captain Bailey did, so that you are allowed to land on the world, how will you be treated? Ask the captain if he was treated like kin.
This woman is a hypocrite, in spite of all her words. No, because of them. They are the spoken advertisements of her hypocrisy. She moans and whines about her inadequate immune system, and says that she must protect herself against the danger of infection. Of course she doesn't do this because she thinks we are foul and diseased. That thought, I suppose, never occurs to her. She whines of her passive life, protected from mischance and misfortune by a too settled society and a too solicitous crowd of robots. How she must hate that! But what endangers her here? What mischance does she feel will befall her on our planet? Yet she has brought 2 robots with her. In this hall we meet in order to honor her and make much of her, yet she brought her 2 robots even here. They are there on the platform with her. Now that the room is generally lit, you can see them. One is an imitation human being, and its name is R. Daniil Olivar. Another is a shameless robot, openly metallic in structure, and its name is R. Giscard Reventloff. Greet them, my fellow Bailey worlders. They are this woman's kinfolk.
Checkmate, groaned D.G. in a whisper. Not yet, said Gladia. There were craning necks in the audience, as if a sudden itch had affected them all, and the word robots ran across the length and breadth of the hall in thousands of intakes of breath. You can see them without trouble. Gladia's voice rang out. Daniil, Giscard, stand up. The 2 robots rose at once behind her. Step to either side of me, she said, so that my body does not block the view. Not that my body is large enough to do much blocking in any case. Now, let me make a few things clear to all of you. These 2 robots did not come with me in order to service me. Yes, they help run my establishment on Aurora, along with 51 other robots, and I do no work for myself that I wish a robot to do for me. That is the custom on the world on which I live. Robots vary in complexity, ability, and intelligence, and these 2 rate very high in those respects. Daniil in particular is, in my opinion, the robot of all robots whose intelligence most nearly approximates the human in those areas where comparison is possible. I have brought only Daniil and Giscard with me, but they perform no great services for me. If you are interested, I dress myself, bathe myself, use my own utensils when I eat, and walk without being carried. Do I use them for personal protection? No. They protect me, yes, but they equally well protect anyone else who needs protection. On Solaria just recently, Daniil did what he could to protect Captain Bailey, and was ready to give up his existence to protect me. Without him, the ship could not have been saved. And I certainly need no protection on this platform. After all, there is a force field stretched across the stage that is ample protection. It is not there at my request, but it is there, and it supplies all the protection I need. Then why are my robots here with me? Those of you who know the story of Elijah Bailey, who freed Earth of its spacer overlords, who initiated the new policy of settlement, and whose son led the first human being to Bailey World. Why else is it called that? Know that well before he knew me, Elijah Bailey worked with Daniil. He worked with him on Earth, on Solaria, and on Aurora, on each of his great cases. To Daniil, Elijah Bailey was always Partner Elijah. I don't know if that fact appears in his biography, but you may safely take my word for it. And although Elijah Bailey, as an Earthman, began with a strong distrust of Daniil, a friendship between them developed. When Elijah Bailey was dying here on this planet over 16 decades ago, when it was just a cluster of prefabricated houses surrounded by garden patches, it was not his son who was with him in his last moment, nor was it I. For a treacherous moment she thought her voice would not hold steady. He sent for Daniil, and he held on to life until Daniil arrived. Yes, this is Daniil's second visit to this planet. I was with him, but I remained in orbit. Steady. It was Daniil alone who made planetfall, Daniil who received his last words. Well, does this mean nothing to you? Her voice rose a notch as she shook her fists in the air. Must I tell you this? Don't you already know it? Here is the robot that Elijah Bailey loved. Yes, loved. I wanted to see Elijah before he died, to say goodbye to him, but he wanted Daniil, and this is Daniil. This is the very one. And this other is Giscard, who knew Elijah only on Aurora, but who managed to save Elijah's life there. Without these two robots, Elijah Bailey would not have achieved his goal. The spacer worlds would still be supreme, the settler worlds would not exist, and none of you would be here. I know that. You know that. I wonder if Mr. Thomas Bistervan knows that. Daniil and Giscard are honored names on this world. They are used commonly by the descendants of Elijah Bailey, at his request. I have arrived on a ship, the captain of which is named Daniil Giscard Bailey. How many, I wonder, among the people I face now, in person and via hyperwave, bear the name of Daniil or Giscard? Well, these robots behind me are the robots those names commemorate. And are they to be denounced by Thomas Bistervan? The growing murmur among the audience was becoming loud, and Gladia lifted her arms imploringly. One moment, let me finish. I have not told you why I brought these two robots. There was immediate silence. These two robots, Gladia said, have never forgotten Elijah Bailey, any more than I have forgotten him. The passing decades have not in the least dimmed those memories. When I was ready to step onto Captain Bailey's ship, when I knew that I might visit Bailey World, how could I refuse to take Daniil and Giscard with me? They wanted to see the planet that Elijah Bailey had made possible, the planet on which he passed his old age and on which he died. Yes, they are robots, but they are intelligent robots who served Elijah Bailey faithfully and well. It is not enough to have respect for all human beings. One must have respect for all intelligent beings. So I brought them here. Then, in a final outcry that demanded a response, "Did I do wrong?" She received her response. A gigantic cry of "No" resounded throughout the hall, and everyone was on his or her feet, clapping, stamping, roaring, screaming, on and on and on. Gladia watched, smiling, and, as the noise continued endlessly, became aware of two things. First, she was wet with perspiration. Second, she was happier than she had ever been in her life. It was as though all her life she had waited for this moment, the moment when she, having been brought up in isolation, could finally learn, after 23 decades, that she could face crowds, and move them, and bend them to her will. She listened to the unwearying, noisy response. On, and on, and on. 35. It was a considerable time later, how long she had no way of telling, that Gladia finally came to herself. There had first been unending noise, the solid wedge of security people herding her through the crowd, the plunge into endless tunnels that seemed to sink deeper and deeper into the ground. She lost contact with DG early, and was not sure that Daniil and Giscard were safely with her. She wanted to ask for them, but only faceless people surrounded her. She thought distantly that the robots had to be with her, for they would resist separation, and she would hear the tumult if an attempt were made. When she finally reached a room, the two robots were there with her. She didn't know precisely where she was, but the room was fairly large and clean. It was poor stuff compared to her home on Aurora, but compared to the shipboard cabin it was quite luxurious. "You will be safe here, madam," said the last of the guards as he left. "If you need anything, just let us know." He indicated a device on a small table next to the bed. She stared at it, but by the time she turned back to ask what it was and how it worked, he was gone. "Oh, well," she thought, "I'll get by." "Giscard," she said wearily, "find out which of those doors leads to the bathroom and find out how the shower works. What I must have now is a shower." She sat down gingerly, aware that she was damp, and unwilling to saturate the chair with her perspiration. She was beginning to ache with the unnatural rigidity of her position when Giscard emerged. "Madam, the shower is running," he said, "and the temperature is adjusted. There is a solid material, which I believe is soap, and a primitive sort of toweling material, along with various other articles that may be useful." "Thank you, Giscard,"
said Gladia, quite aware that despite her grandiloquence on the manner in which robots such as Giscard did not perform menial service, that is precisely what she had required him to do. But circumstances alter cases. If she had never needed a shower, it seemed to her, as badly as now, she had also never enjoyed one as much. She remained in it much longer than she had to, and when it was over, it didn't even occur to her to wonder if the towels had been in any way irradiated to sterility until after she had dried herself, and by that time it was too late. She rummaged about among the material Giscard had laid out for her: powder, deodorant, comb, toothpaste, hairdryer, but she could not locate anything that would serve as a toothbrush. She finally gave up and used her finger, which she found most unsatisfactory. There was no hairbrush, and that too was unsatisfactory. She scrubbed the comb with soap before using it, but cringed away from it just the same. She found a garment that looked as though it were suitable for wearing to bed. It smelled clean, but it hung far too loosely, she decided. Daniil said quietly, "Madam, the captain wishes to know if he may see you." "I suppose so," said Gladia, still rummaging for alternate nightwear. "Let him in." DG looked tired and even haggard, but when she turned to greet him, he smiled wearily at her and said, "It is hard to believe that you are over 23 decades old." "What? In this thing?" "That helps. It's semi-transparent. Or didn't you know?" She looked down at the nightgown uncertainly, then said, "Good, if it amuses you, but I have been alive just the same for 2 1/3 centuries. No one would guess it to look at you. You must have been very beautiful in your youth." "I have never been told so, DG. Quiet charm, I always believed, was the most I could aspire to. In any case, how do I use that instrument?" "The call box. Just touch the patch on the right side and someone will ask if you can be served, and you can carry on from there." "Good. I will need a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and clothing." "The toothbrush and hairbrush I will see that you get. As for clothing, that has been thought of. You have a clothes bag hanging in your closet. You will find it contains the best in Bailey World fashion, which may not appeal to you, of course, and I won't guarantee they'll fit you. Most Bailey World women are taller than you, and certainly wider and thicker. But it doesn't matter. I think you'll remain in seclusion for quite a while." "Why?" "Well, my lady, it seems you delivered a speech this past evening, and, as I recall, you would not sit down, though I suggested you do that more than once." "It seemed quite successful to me, DG." "It was. It was a howling success." DG smiled broadly and scratched the right side of his beard as though considering the word very carefully. "However, success has its penalties, too. Right now, I should say you are the most famous person on Bailey World, and every Bailey Worlder wants to see you and touch you. If we take you out anywhere, it will mean an instant riot. At least until things cool down. We can't be sure how long that will take. Then, too, you had even the Warhawks yelling for you, but in the cold light of tomorrow, when the hypnotism and hysteria dies down, they're going to be furious. If old man Bistervan didn't actually consider killing you outright after your talk, then by tomorrow he will certainly have it as the ambition of his life to murder you by slow torture, and there are people of his party who might conceivably try to oblige the old man in this small whim of his. That's why you're here, my lady. That's why this room, this floor, this entire hotel is being watched by I don't know how many platoons of security people, among whom, I hope, are no crypto-warhawks. And because I have been so closely associated with you in this hero and heroine game, I'm pinned up here too and can't get out." "Oh," said Gladia blankly. "I'm sorry about that. You can't see your family, then?" DG shrugged. "Traders don't really have much in the way of family." "Your woman friend, then?" "She'll survive. Probably better than I will." He cast his eyes on Gladia speculatively. Gladia said evenly, "Don't even think it, Captain." DG's eyebrows rose. "There's no way I can be prevented from thinking it. But I won't do anything, madam." Gladia said, "How long do you think I will stay here? Seriously." "It depends on the directory." "The directory?" "Our 5-fold executive board, madam. 5 people." He held up his hand with the fingers spread apart. "Each serving 5 years in staggered fashion, with one replacement each year, plus special elections in case of death or disability. This supplies continuity and reduces the danger of one-person rule. It also means that every decision must be argued out, and that takes time, sometimes more time than we can afford.
I should think, said Gladia, that if one of the 5 were a determined and forceful individual,
that he could impose his views on the others. Things like that have happened at times, but these times are not one of those, if you know what I mean. The senior director is Genevieve Pandarow. There's nothing evil about him, but he's indecisive, and sometimes that's the same thing. I talked him into allowing your robots on the stage with you, and that turned out to be a bad idea. Score 1 against both of us.
But why was it a bad idea? The people were pleased.
Too pleased, my lady. We wanted you to be our pet spacer heroine and help keep public opinion cool so that we wouldn't launch a premature war. You were very good on longevity. You had them cheering short life. But then you had them cheering robots, and we don't want that. For that matter, we're not so keen on the public cheering the notion of kinship with the spacers.
You don't want premature war, but you don't want premature peace either, is that it?
Very well put, madam.
But then what do you want?
We want the galaxy, the whole galaxy. We want to settle and populate every habitable planet in it, and establish nothing less than a galactic empire, and we don't want the spacers to interfere. They can remain on their own worlds and live in peace as they please, but they must not interfere.
But then you'll be pinning them up on their 50 worlds, as we pinned up Earth people on Earth for so many years. The same old injustice. You're as bad as Mr. Van.
The situations are different. Earth people were penned up in defiance of their expansive potential. You spacers have no such potential. You took the path of longevity and robots, and the potential vanished. You don't even have 50 worlds any longer. Solaria has been abandoned. The others will go, too, in time. The settlers have no interest in pushing the spacers along the path to extinction, but why should we interfere with their voluntary choice to do so? Your speech tended to interfere with that.
I'm glad. What did you think I would say?
I told you. Peace and love and sit down. You could have finished in about 1 minute.
Gladia said angrily, I can't believe you expected anything so foolish of me. What did you take me for?
For what you took yourself for. Someone frightened to death of speaking. How did we know that you were a madwoman who could, in half an hour, persuade the Bailey Worlders to howl in favor of what for lifetimes we have been persuading them to howl against? But talk will get us nowhere.
He rose heavily to his feet.
I want a shower, too, and I had better get a night's sleep if I can. See you tomorrow.
But when do we find out what the directors will decide to do with me?
When they find out, which may not be soon. Good night, madam.
36. I have made a discovery, said Giscard, his voice carrying no shade of emotion. I have made it because for the first time in my existence I faced thousands of human beings. Had I done this 2 centuries ago, I would have made the discovery then. Had I never faced so many at once, then I would never have made the discovery at all. Consider, then, how many vital points I might easily grasp, but never have and never will, simply because the proper conditions for it will never come my way. I remain ignorant except where circumstance helps me, and I cannot count on circumstance. Vanille said, I do not think, friend Giscard, that Lady Gladia, with her long-sustained way of life, could face thousands with equanimity. I did not think she would be able to speak at all. When it turned out that she could, I assumed you had adjusted her, and that you had discovered that it could be done without harming her. Was that your discovery? Giscard said, Friend Danil, actually all I dared do was loosen a very few strands of inhibition, only enough to allow her to speak a few words so that she might be heard. But she did far more than that. After this microscopic adjustment, I turned to the multiplicity of minds I faced in the audience. I had never experienced so many, any more than Lady Gladia had, and I was as taken aback as she was. I found at first that I could do nothing in the vast mental interlockingness that beat in upon me. I felt helpless. And then I noted small friendlinesses, curiosities, interests. I cannot describe them in words, with a color of sympathy for Lady Gladia about them.
I played with what I could find that had this color of sympathy, tightening and thickening them just slightly. I wanted some small response in Lady Gladia's favor that might encourage her, that might make it unnecessary for me to be tempted to tamper further with Lady Gladia's mind. That was all I did. I do not know how many threads of the proper color I handled. Not many. Daniil said, "And then what, friend Giscard?" I found, friend Daniil, that I had begun something that was autocatalytic. Each thread I strengthened a nearby thread of the same kind, and the two together strengthened several others nearby. I had to do nothing further. Small stirs, small sounds, and small glances that seemed to approve of what Lady Gladia said encouraged still others. Then I found something stranger yet. All these little indications of approval, which I could detect only because the minds were open to me, Lady Gladia must have also detected in some manner, for further inhibitions in her mind fell without my touching them. She began to speak faster, more confidently, and the audience responded better than ever, without my doing anything. And in the end there was hysteria, a storm, a tempest of mental thunder and lightning so intense that I had to close my mind to it, or it would have overloaded my circuits. Never in all my existence had I encountered anything like that, and yet it started with no more modification introduced by me in all that crowd than I have in the past introduced among a mere handful of people. I suspect, in fact, that the effect spread beyond the audience sensible to my mind to the greater audience reached via hyperwave. Daniil said, "I do not see how this can be, friend Giscard." "Nor I, friend Daniil. I am not human. I do not directly experience the possession of a human mind with all its complexities and contradictions, so I do not grasp the mechanisms by which they respond. But apparently crowds are more easily managed than individuals. It seems paradoxical. Much weight takes more effort to move than little weight. Much energy takes more effort to counter than little energy. Much distance takes longer to traverse than little distance. Why, then, should many people be easier to sway than few? You think like a human being, friend Daniil. Can you explain?" Daniil said, "You yourself, friend Giscard, said that it was an autocatalytic effect, a matter of contagion. A single spark of flame may end by burning down a forest." Giscard paused and seemed deep in thought. Then he said, "It is not reason that is contagious, but emotion. Madame Gladia chose arguments she felt would move her audience's feelings. She did not attempt to reason with them. It may be, then, that the larger the crowd, the more easily they are swayed by emotion rather than by reason. Since emotions are few and reasons are many, the behavior of a crowd can be more easily predicted than the behavior of one person can, and that, in turn, means that if laws are to be developed that enable the current of history to be predicted, then one must deal with large populations, the larger the better. That might itself be the first law of psychohistory, the key to the study of humanics. Yet, yes, it strikes me that it has taken me so long to understand this only because I am not a human being. A human being would, perhaps, instinctively understand his own mind well enough to know how to handle others like himself. Madame Gladia, with no experience at all in addressing huge crowds, carried off the matter expertly. How much better off we would be if we had someone like Elijah Bailey with us. Friend Daniil, are you not thinking of him? Daniil said, "Can you see his image in my mind? That is surprising, friend Giscard." "I do not see him, friend Daniil. I cannot receive your thoughts. But I can sense emotions and mood, and your mind has a texture which, by past experience, I know to be associated with Elijah Bailey." Madame Gladia made mention of the fact that I was the last to see partner Elijah alive, so I listen again in memory to that moment. I think again of what he said. "Why, friend Daniil?" "I search for the meaning. I feel it was important." "How could what he said have meaning beyond the import of the words? Had there been hidden meaning, Elijah Bailey would have expressed it." "Perhaps," said Daniil slowly, "partner Elijah did not himself understand the significance of what he was saying.